Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. Joining me today, Nick Marcil. Nick is a higher education organizer, particularly with the Pennsylvania branch of Strike Debt, the Debt Collective. And that's where we're going to be going first. The Debt Collective is at the forefront of these efforts to get the government of the United States to forgive student loan debt. That is a huge problem in this country. Now, let's back up. Nick, my sort of foggy recollection is that this was a sort of like post-Occupy movement that sort of, and like trying to get Democrats on board with this has been like a decade plus long fight.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the Debt Collective itself has its roots in the Occupy Wall Street movement, really where it, first raised the demand for student debt cancellation and really, talking about this issue, right, of, this idea of the 99% versus the 1%. And, really some of the, states and fates of folks there at Occupy and, bringing up this issue of student debt, for themselves, for others that they know. And when you point out, Matt, of, in particular, trying to get this on the map or, trying to get, you could say, various Democrats or politicians or even just, regular folks to, be thinking of this idea the way that I'd say that it is, here and now. When you think back to it, then Vice President Joe Biden wasn't talking about student debt cancellation nor free college or anything. Neither was President Obama. It was something that arguably a lot of folks were just kind of laughing at, and really now, and you could even say in the past like couple years or so, it's gotten into the mainstream like discourse of talking about student debt cancellation or even other kinds of debt cancellation. I remember in particular of what was it? I think a tweet that like Mitt Romney said or something of like responding to people calling for student debt cancellation and saying, oh, what's next? Like credit cards, medical debt, like what have you. And it's like, yeah, maybe we should, right? So, yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the credit card debt and those other forms of debt, because I do think there's definitely been movement on this stuff. I think anybody, if you could get their attention on it, would sort of recoil at student lunch debt. At least in my memory, maybe in the 80s, I don't remember that far back. But like that should be appalling to people. I feel like credit card debt now, as we're having a greater understanding of how wages have not kept up with productivity and cost of living, I think people I think credit card debt is sort of where student debt was maybe 15 years ago. But as far as the student loan debt, like, it's definitely a crisis that accelerated post-financial crisis. And yeah, like this sort of movement, I think Bernie, I imagine, spoke to it in 2016 and probably really brought on the map for sort of national politics.
Yeah, I think so in part. I mean, like what I'll mention kind of around that time, I think it was in like 2015 is when the Debt Collective organized the, first ever student debt strike to actually force the Obama administration's hand to discharge student loans, particularly from these like fraudulent for-profit universities, thinking of the like Corinthian strikers and the Corinthian colleges in particular. And notably when you mentioned Bernie Sanders, I know that, there were Debt Collective members back in like 2019 who, stood alongside Senator Sanders, Rep. Omar Ocasio-Cortez and Jayapal, pushing on and introducing college for all legislation there. So, it's definitely something in where there's been like ties along the way. And even, I think this sort of continued push, has helped. And in particular to the, moment that we're at now and, even, getting things onto the Biden administration's agenda in whatever way. I mean, there were a lot of other unions and civil rights groups, who were definitely alongside in, fighting for this push for debt cancellation, both understanding of the, various implications of, for instance, 2/3 of student loan debt is held by women. We know that like Black women have, particularly some of the highest amounts of student loan debt. And then thinking of it that, really this debt is a labor issue. If you continue to have the same amount of debt, accrue or even more, and your wages are stagnant, I'm sorry, that's taking away from your like continued gains or attempts at gains. So it's just something, important to point out there.
Yeah, and point out that that's not something the ruling class isn't aware of. I think I've mentioned in a previous talk that John Schwartz pulled a quote from the '80s, I think it was, of a advisor to Reagan saying we're at risk of creating an educated proletariat. Right in terms I think we can understand. I'm curious. I haven't seen any, for all the talk of class realignment across the parties, I haven't seen any professional Republicans support the idea of student loan forgiveness. I'm curious what, Republicans ideologically, like normal everyday people, if you have any experience with that.
Yeah, so I would say that I do, both of talking to a few folks here and there, who might directly say that they identify as a Republican. I can think of one person in particular who, I know when they were talking to me, I think at first they were maybe even a little, I don't know, you could say embarrassed in some way, shape, or form, of like thinking of them being a Republican and being for this. I think like largely, as you pointed out, Matt, there really aren't those like mainstream Republican politicians who are calling for this. But also, I definitely always like to point to too. There's this like clip, I think from about a year ago, that CNN had, where they went to like Scranton, Pennsylvania, and were trying to particularly talk to Republicans and folks in typically more rural PA, and a lot of them were actually supportive of student loan debt. There was one person who was like a retired banker who was saying that like he actually views student debt differently. You could say in part that's because I think he mentioned like some people in his own family, and other folks who were saying that like their kids have it, or maybe they have Parent Plus loans. And arguably CNN had trouble kind of finding some of these like heartland Republicans totally hating on student loan debt cancellation. But yeah, and just briefly going back to the Mitt Romney thing that I mentioned earlier, of like, again, when you call into question some of these other types of debt, like, that might actually get some other folks to, kind of more open the eyes. Like, again, it's something, even when you think about it, that, any conservative that might be, saying that they're for it, or even sometimes some liberals will sometimes say it in a more like, means tested, bureaucratic kind of way of who's deserving and who's not, right? And I would say that we need to throw that out. And then lastly, to say, there's, interestingly, and not giving credit really to this person, there was someone within the Trump administration who was under the Department of Education during when it was Secretary DeVos. And he was, I believe it was like the chief operating officer of the FSA, like the Federal Student Aid. And he left the department and, went around basically saying that he was for cancellation, although he was also making like a run for Senate and Congress like afterwards. But again, it's like he was very much articulating like issues with the student loan system, but in a very much more conservative way of saying, oh my gosh, we need to get rid of all these loans from the federal government's portfolio. Let's privatize it all. And it's like, okay, yes, I get you. These loans shouldn't exist, but that means free college. That doesn't mean privatize all this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's always a really sticky thing to try to emphasize, because I see a lot of on the right saying, if there should be no sort of help for anybody to get to college, and I hesitate to call student loans help, but that's the only way people getting their foot in the door, because otherwise people are price discriminated out of it. I think what's so exciting to me about like what the Debt Collective's done is I think there's a greater awareness of all these things as the same sort of structure. And we have talk of like taxi medallion debt and stuff like that too, and there's certain things where the over financializing this stuff has absolutely failed.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And it is really important to highlight of how any and all of these debts are interconnected. I definitely know, some folks that I went to college with in particular who, let's say that they put some bills basically into their student loans, right? If you can't really afford the housing, how are you going to do that? Are you going to put it on a credit card? Are you going
Right.
to take out more loans? A lot of these, as well with like medical debt, people will put that onto a credit card, and people will say, oh, well, there's not that many people who have medical debt, or, some people like, they're finding ways to pay it off. But it's like, is that really a way to do it, to put it on a credit card? I mean, none of it should exist in the first place, as we're
Right.
saying. And, that's really like the heart of the matter.
Yeah. So let's move to the Biden administration. How did this? Where was Joe at in the campaign on this? And then we can move to his administration.
Yeah. So again, looking back to it, something that's funny to point out is Biden during his campaign did directly say that he was for, and again, I'm going to be specific here, as he kind of was, for canceling all undergraduate federal tuition-related student debt. And then also student debt, regarding HBCUs and MSIs, so historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions. Again, something in which is not like touted as much anymore, but something still to like bring back up of, he wasn't just saying during the campaign 10K, 20K, as, was the plan that he, then announced. It was something arguably more expansive. But again, when you get to a lot of these, very like specific means tested situations, or, who's like worthy, who's not, it does a lot of the times leave some of the most vulnerable out, and also like creates its own bureaucracy and craziness of, okay, so when do I know that this is tuition related and if this is not tuition related, or whatever sort of issues. And similarly, folks who will, actually get their federal student debt sometimes into private lending hands afterwards if they consolidate, for instance, like the company SoFi that, owns the LA Rams like stadium.
It's great that we have all these that and mortgage companies owning all of the sports stadiums. That's awesome.
Exactly. But to get back though to your question, Matt, of like some of the timeline stuff, if folks remember, Biden, once he got into office, he was pressured to basically get a memo that was just like a big pink out, like instead of like blackout, like pink out of an email regarding his legal authority, which he does have to cancel student debt. Additionally, he, went again and again and again of extending this payment pause, which started under Trump, under the guise of COVID and, like helping folks for here and now. But arguably, that could still just continue, right? And it's something that was extended a total of 9 times, both like together under Trump and Biden, and something in which the Debt Collective helped organize back in like April of last year into a rally at the Department of Education, which got it kicked another time, right? Like, there is such an importance in like the pressure to, make some of these things happen. And, certainly the Biden administration seemed as though they were, probably cautious of using this legal authority. And, when finally push came to shove in sort of, stamping down on his then like one campaign promise of saying $10,000 for everyone, he announced, it was about a year ago, that he was going to be doing this 10K, 20K. So 10K for anyone and everyone who makes under $125,000 a year. And then 20K if you have received a Pell Grant and are under that. But again, that was just an announcement. It took like 6 weeks until he actually had put an application out, which also shouldn't and didn't need to happen. And again, it was means tested, right? Like, I get it. Some people, whoever they are, trying to say, well, does someone who's over 125,000, like, I'm sorry, like, why does any of this debt, have to exist in the first place? And that is going to leave so many people out when you have this application, when you means test this stuff. We already know this with so many things.
Yeah, and I'll just say from a very cynical economic standpoint, if I didn't care at all about like the negative effects of being indebted, I would say, you know what, you forgive that debt because guess what? That money's going to go back into the economy instead of to users, right? That's just a better place for the money to go. And this idea that like people who are, yes, like the people who are making like $150,000 but have like a lot of student loan debt, they didn't come from rich people. But guess what? If they aren't going to pay the bank, they're going to put that money back into the local economy. And it's actually going to be better for like everybody.
No, exactly. And, also, again, of why and where do you draw this line, right? Like, when it comes to public K to 12 education, we don't draw a line to say that, oh, this student is worthy to get into the public school, but this student's parents makes enough money. Or I always remember like back to the 2016 primaries of, Bernie and Hillary Clinton, talking about whether or not to have free college or to like means test it in that kind of way. And I remember specifically that Hillary was mentioning, oh, well, do we really want Donald Trump's kids going to a public college? I'm sorry, they're more than likely not going to. Like, the idea of these things is not to means test them, to like, exclude, like, we are trying to bring people together into this like public system. And I will note, though, it is something in which, these public goods, like, whether it's a library, whether it is, K to 12 schools, they need to make sure that they are reparative, because there are plenty of times in which our public institutions are not actually doing that. And, just something to point out there.
Yeah. I mean, and I would just say one on the broader point of this. You can tell people who want a means test for supposedly like class-based reasons that they aren't serious, because the real solution to that was invented by Abe Lincoln, a little thing called the progressive income tax. And you raise that baby up on those, and the same people that are saying, oh, we can't forgive student loan debt are gonna be like, no, we don't want to be raising taxes on the wealthiest people. And so it's yes, okay, those people that are getting high income, raise their income tax. That's problem solved.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it.
Biden, and I get just one note on the form that I signed along with a lot of others. Was that as cynical as it might look now as a way to get people's info, or am I being too conspiratorial when I look at that and then what happened later, which is the courts are like, oh, you can't do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's its own good question, right? I do not have a crystal ball to look into the Biden administration in regards to it. I mean, it certainly could be in some way, shape, or form. But also, again, the reason why any of that application and form, stuff was there was because they means tested, was because they tried to be, strict on like who qualifies, who doesn't, who gets 10K, who gets 20K, who gets left out. And we didn't need to do any of that. It could have just been, we are just wiping this debt away. And yeah, it's just its own ridiculous thing. And as you pointed out, Matt, again, if we want to say like something about deservingness in whatever way, or who's paying, whatever, then yes, progressive income tax, or, actually understand the real way in which this goes, because you don't know everyone's individual situation with these things. And, plenty of folks have this debt, are struggling, it can and it should be canceled.
So where are we now? We have some callers to this program who've talked about they've seen some debt relief, massive amounts for one of them. And we have repayment starting for others in about a month. Talk about where we're at now.
Yeah, totally. So, right now, as we're recording, tomorrow, September 1st, is when interest kicks back in for folks, right? So the kind of official end of the payment pause, which again, I'll remind folks, was said to have ended back a year ago or so, and then was kicked down the road and down the road and down the road and down the road. But really, Biden used student debtors as bargaining chips within the debt ceiling deal to try to, put a nail in the coffin on an ending with this thing. It is something in which he could arguably just restart another payment pause, But of course that's something that, takes pressure, takes coordination, right? But in, particular for folks now, as you pointed out, Matt, yes, like in October is when, payments are restarting for folks. And notably, there is this on-ramp period over the next year, which again, interest, can and will still accrue for folks. But there are certain, like, critical things that, folks who might be, nervous about. It's not going to be reported to like a credit bureau for federal student debt. It's not going to be like tossed into default, like some of these things, which the Department of Education and Biden administration kind of outlines. But again, I would kind of argue that some of that is more of like, how do we just like ease people into this, or sort of say that we're doing something, and sort of quiet some folks down of saying, no, don't worry, like you have time, you're fine. Okay, the interest is still ticking, like you're telling me I have to pay these again. You didn't cancel the debt that you promised to cancel, like in the way that you were promising it. Yes, for sure, as you pointed out, Matt, and I think that it's great. There are a number of folks who have gotten their debt canceled. I was talking with someone who either is in like their 60s or 70s, who did just get all of their debt canceled and emailed me like, oh my God, Nick, this is because of everything that we've been doing. Like, this is incredible, but I'm also like nervous. Like, is this actually real? Like, right? Like, And again, with all this confusion, I can understand that. But yeah, again, it's something in where, yes, payments, restarting, but I will say, as I'll probably talk about a little bit more, there is a new awesome tool that the Debt Collective has in terms of directly telling the Department of Education, like, hey, we know you have this authority. You need to use it. And also, here is like directly my situation. Like, are you really going to tell someone like, who, I don't know, has $100,000 of student loan debt, who, maybe is, living like month to month in whatever way that it is, whatever situations that it like, that folks are going through, like, are you going to tell me that like I have to pay this back, like right here, right now, in this supposed, oh, we're out of the pandemic, everything's fine, the economy's better, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I am so nasty, I guess I'll say, about the Biden economy is doing great thing, because I think it sets the context for these sorts of decisions. Like when Biden, like you said, I heard people, when he paused it back this far, suggest that they're just going to kick the can down the road the entire time, and they should do that. They should make the Republicans restart it, and to not do that, like it's really frustrating. And I also just point out one thing, which is that what we hear about, and this both times I've had somebody call in, both the Majority Report and this show, to say, hey, I got student loan debt relief. I had to remind myself that some people in media suggest my natural response should be resent because I still have a giant balance on mine. And of course, like, that's not how I don't think anybody listening to this feels. Like, I am so happy for those people. I can't fucking imagine. And like, I want that for everybody. Like, it's not like, oh, how dare you, sir? When I'm left here with, like, that's just not how people react.
No, 100%. And actually, you're making me think of there's a branch of the Debt Collective in Colorado that's actually doing a $0 party for folks who have gotten that in that way. Like, again, like, there is celebration to be had in that. Like with any kind of achievement in whatever way that it is, or just something to be glad with other people about. And then there is also like the important reminder of like, hey, what is happening, for the rest of folks? And again, some of the folks that I've talked to who, have gotten this cancellation, like the one person in particular I mentioned, were like, oh no, I'm still in it, like, fighting for other people, because it is really like, it's not me, it's us. Like, I always love that line. Like, it's true.
I mean, I would imagine renewed energy. Like, I mean, that is so there. I mean, I saw that Department of Education tweet where it's like about suicide awareness and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, this is extremely serious, which is why we need to be addressing this as not just like some sort of personal failing. It's literally like the debt levels we have and are putting the young generations under is a public health problem too.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I mean, it really is something in where if the Department of Education, the Biden administration, like whoever have you, wants to say that they're caring about mental health, it's not about the like, Ted Lassos of the world, like giving like a little spiel. It's kind of maybe more about like, I don't know, canceling this debt, like, getting a lot of these, real financial pressures off of, people, really what it's doing to them. I know I can't think off the top of my head, but, there are certain statistics around, and I would definitely encourage folks to, look up of, how like, scary and shocking it can be for folks, whether it's student debt, medical debt, other kinds of debt, and what that means for like themselves in terms of mental health, their lives, so on.
I really think it's like I don't think you can divorce these contexts, like rising loneliness even too, like these, because I've experienced this. I've been a underemployed post-college student, and guess what, not great for my social life either, like in addition to the economic stuff, and it's just an urgent problem. So yeah, talk about again that the tool of the debt collectives DOE tool. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, but
Yeah, no, totally. So in particular, right, the Debt Collective just launched back on Monday, which was if I get my dates correctly, the 28th. This new Biden Better Have Our Money student debt release tool. Also, if you see B and then 4 stars, that is a Rihanna reference, and also, it's Biden. Right. So again, with that tool, as I like somewhat mentioned earlier, it's something in where, we have some legal folks, who helped kind of, craft this together, as well as an amazing tech team. And in particular, you will, type in some of that information, regarding like yourself, your loan, some of the stuff that you were, like dealing with, and it will put it beautifully together into this, kind of like legal memo / letter directly to the Department of Education, where, I'm pretty sure it's directly getting emailed to like Secretary Cardona, the Ombudsman's office, and so on, at the Department of Education, and, making that claim and making that stand of, hey, we know that you have the power to do this, and you can and should cancel this. And I'll also importantly note, this is something that the Debt Collective did way back when, kind of to get the Biden administration to start canceling this like fraudulent and for-profit college debt. And the Debt Collective was, basically behind creating what's known as borrower defense to repayment. There was some like legal language within, certain loan law stuff, whatever, and, kind of highlighting certain things. And, we were able to get together like, a tool, you could say similar-ish to this, and, getting folks to, share these stories, getting folks to, directly call out saying you have the power to do this and should be doing something. And, as of now, as we're recording this, I know that we have over 10,000 folks who have filled this out, which is awesome because, it hasn't even been like a full like week yet. And yeah, it's something in where I definitely recommend folks, if you go to bit.ly/student debt release tool altogether, you can fill that out. It'll take, maybe like 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Again, depends on how detailed that you are willing to go in sharing the story. And you will be getting a copy of that letter yourself. And there's ways in which we're talking, within the Debt Collective of, getting folks to sort of organize with these letters and, maybe going to some other elected officials to particularly showcase like, this is what we're doing, and maybe you should get on board.
Yeah, I mean, anybody I know who's worked in a bureaucracy like that stuff has an effect. So that's really great to hear. Before I let you go, just talk about some of the other maybe student lunch debt or other initiatives Debt Collective has going on.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll also quickly note, because I forgot to, was for folks who maybe you have, questions about the tool or are, trying to like learn a little bit more, or even get like a little bit of a walkthrough with it. We are having a call on September 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. So definitely be on the lookout for that. I'll make sure to share that. So that link hopefully is in the description. And then, yeah, in terms of other kinds of debt, again, the Debt Collective is not just about student debt. There are, for instance, myself, I'm involved in kind of like a campaign coalition in Pennsylvania to cancel school meal debt. Myself and a few others, we actually got one particular school district to cancel a little bit over $20,000 in school meal debt. Again, kind of like what you said, Matt, of these things have an effect. Sort of doing some organizing, getting some stuff in the paper, and having folks talk at a school board meeting maybe can have an effect to get your own school district to consider canceling school meal debt. Because we did do it with this one district, and we're trying to, kind of do it further, but also really, ignite the call in Pennsylvania for universal school meals, breakfast and lunch, right? It shouldn't just be one or the other, as we've seen, with a number of states recently pushing that. But that's important, as well as, some of these other debt types of whether it's, within housing, whether it's medical debt, and even carceral debt. Some interesting things to point out.
I mean, that's just so impressive to me, $20,000, because I think, like, one, what that does for just the immediate well-being of those families, and then two, what it means to, like, spread the message for the other kinds of, like, debt relief that you guys are working for. It's just like, it's really, you don't hear a lot of great stories like that, but that's really impressive.
Yeah, no, I thank you for saying that, Matt. I mean, I definitely think so. And I'm, proud of that and like proud of this, continued push. And, kind of to like add on to that, the $20,000, right? We didn't even, give the school district any money to say, well, pay like, pennies on the dollar for this debt, like what a lot of the times happens with medical debt or other kinds of debt through debt collectors. And notably something in where, I know I've seen some folks are even kind of viral in places of raising money, for this debt. What if you just get the school district to cancel it, right off the bat, right? We don't necessarily need like a corporation or like a grocery store or whatever to say, oh, we'll pay off the debt this year. Okay, what about next year, right?
Right.
So important things to keep in mind, like similar with the student debt fight, it's something in where, it's not just of canceling this debt. It's about, getting college for all.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've seen occasionally a philanthropist says, this class's student loan debt is canceled. And it's like, that's nice for that class.
Yeah.
Is this just like to get us through this moment where people are talking about it? I appreciate it, but yeah. Nick Marcil, where can people follow you?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter, I believe, at MarcilNick. I think that's kind of the only place per se. And then also, follow the Debt Collective at Strike Debt on Twitter, at the Debt Collective on Instagram. And yeah, just, definitely reach out and, use this tool. Again, it is bit.ly/student debt release tool, all one word. Fill it out. Send a letter, a legal memo to the Department of Education demanding that this debt gets canceled for you and for everyone else.
Nick Marcil, thanks so much, man, and for your work too.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt.